Henry is a 12-year-old kid who is going to school with his younger brother Peter. He talks about the good and bad people in the world. In next scene, Tommy, one of Henry's classmates, is standing in his class, explaining his legacy to participate in Olympics and playing dodgeball. Henry is invited next by the teacher, and he says that his legacy is to behave well with others, understand the present, and work hard as much as he can. The school bell rings, and the students started leaving the class. Teacher admires his intellect and asks the reason of refusing the school for gifted people. He replies that it is good for his psychosocial development to interact with his peers like a normal child would do. Afterwards, he stands at a phone booth, talking to someone about his stock market business. His mother Susan arrives and whistles them both to get in the car. Peter, sitting in his bedroom, talks to Henry over the walkie-talkie to convince him to allow him in his treehouse, where Henry does some science experiments. He allows him to come, and they have a small talk about Peter's choice of experimenting. Later, he takes a bath and Susan comes downstairs, sits on a couch beside Henry, and started playing some video games. Henry asks her about the charges of an amusement park, which she says that it is not worth the money. They also talk about the financial statement. At night, she reads the bedtime story for them, and checks the new medal Henry got and didn't even find it necessary to tell her. Henry says that he has gifted this medal to Peter to make him happy. Peter asks for a movie night tomorrow, but she refuses due to his night shift. Henry says that it is not worth now for her to work, as he have a lot of investments in stocks. He asks her to resign from her job and work on her storybooks, but she refuses him, thinking it a very childish idea, and left. In the morning, she serves the breakfast and Henry teaches her how to download the financial statements. Glenn, also known as Mr. Sickleman, calls Susan and asks her to remove the leaves from her yard timely as it gets into his garden. She understands and calls Christina, Glenn's stepdaughter, standing behind the door, and gives her love. She returns and whispers in Henry's ear that she is her future daughter-in-law. She goes to work where they talk about the money and paychecks along with serving the orders. In school, Morris snatches the medal from Peter and he calls Henry. He goes to check the situation and finds Christina sitting on a bench and goes to greet her. The bullies started beating Peter and the medal gets broken. They return home and he tries to make up Peter's mood. Later, Sheila comes home with Susan for a night over. They drink and talk about their lives. Sheila shares that her mother was very possessive about her and scared her friends. Susan adds that she was being protective. She also says that her son Henry is a grown-up man. Henry, unable to sleep, takes medicine and goes to the window to look out at Christina's house. Glenn is drinking while she is playing in her room. She tucks into bed and pretends to be asleep when he comes to her room. Next morning, Susan gives Kristen a lift to drop her school. She, as usual, looks quiet and somber. Henry watches her refusing the birthday donut of a student and goes to the student counselor. She refuses to hear anything because Glenn is also a police commissioner. Henry tries to convince her that she is a victim of abuse, but she denies due to lack of evidence. Susan picks up the kids from school to check up on Sheila, who did not appear at work. They find Sheila sleeping on the chair in yard due to drinking. The kids go away and Susan sits with her to have a drink. They go for grocery shopping and Henry gets infuriated to watch a man abusing a girl at grocery store. His mother bars him to interfere in their matter. They get home and Henry calls the Child Protection Service and reports Christina's case. Susan, taking groceries out of the car, meets Christina, who comments that her kids are lucky to have her. Susan comments the same about her father, but she says stepfather and leaves. At night, Susan recommends Henry to involve in extracurricular activities besides studying. He brings the topic of grocery store incident and asks her mother why she did not do anything. She replies that to avoid violence because she thinks that their interference might increase their fight. Henry replies that apathy is more dangerous than violence. Next morning, an officer from Child Protection Department arrives at Glenn's house to talk about Christina. Glenn goes to her room, says something and brings her to the door. The officer talks to her and leaves satisfied. Henry gets fed up and goes to the bridge to write something in his book. He checks the rates of guns and buys the books related to criminology. At night, Peter shouts to call her mother, and she finds Henry on the ground, having a seizure. They rush to the hospital and doctors conduct his surgery. In the morning, Dr. David comes to Henry's room and shares the complications. Henry wants to be alone, so his mother and doctor leave. He studies the books related to medical operations. In school, teacher informed the class about Henry's condition, and students write cards for him. Sheila visits Henry in the hospital, who is busy drawing in his notes, making a plan. She tries to talk about her cold behavior, but Henry says that it is a reaction formation, and this is just his childish act. Henry sends Peter to bring ice cream and asks her mother to bring all the work-related files. She, downhearted, says that they will work on it next week. He replies that he might not be alive till then. She cries and leaves. Peter brings the ice cream, and Henry tells Peter to ask Mom to read his red sketchbook and advises him to take care of Mom. Peter keeps crying and Henry gives him a hug. Susan brings all the files and he explains everything to her and advises to buy a new car. She cries and gives him a remark that he is the best part of her. At night, Henry removes all his tubes and rushes to the window. Susan wakes up, holds him, and he says that he wants to look at the sky. Nurse rushes to call the doctor, but he passes away in her arms. The days keep passing and life changes for Susan and Peter. One day, Peter returns home and she says that they will eat dessert for the whole week. She says that she is having a hard time and does not know what would Henry do. Peter advises her to do what she wants. The bell rings and Dr. David comes to talk with Peter and to know about their health. Peter says that he is not fine and his head hurts. He gives him a card and asks him to call when he feels bad. Susan goes to work and her colleague asks her to take a break and hands over a document, saying that Henry left $680,000 in his account for her. She keeps saying that she is fine and leaves crying. When she returns home, Peter gives that red sketchbook to his mom and says that Henry wanted to kill Glenn. She reads the book but understood nothing. She grasps the purpose and decides to call Child Protective Service. She reads that Henry has already written that this would be in vain and they have to come up with another solution. Susan says that this is not what she is going to do and leaves to prepare food. She makes up her mind and goes to the police station. As the police arrive at Glenn's house, he stopped them at the door and tells them to leave without any investigation. Susan, who witnessed this, got disappointed. She also calls several agencies which yield no result. At night, as she puts Peter to sleep and stands by the window, she watches Christina turning the lamp on and off while Glenn sits downstairs. The light in Christina's room appears, signaling Glenn's coming. She gets worried for her and decides to carry out Henry's plan. She opens the book again and reaches a page which reads "Open the safe." She opens it and finds a voice recorder. She plays it and follows everything Henry says. First, she withdraws some cash from the ATM and then goes to the arms shop to buy a gun. She starts practicing and gets the target straight. Peter goes in the treehouse and she goes behind him to ask if he needs any help. Then, she visited Glenn's house, meets Christina and says that she is worried about Peter if something happens to her and asks him if he has thought of sending Christina somewhere in case something happens to him as well. He clearly states that he is healthy and he has never given a thought to this topic. She takes his signature for talent show permission and says that she will pick Christina at 6 tomorrow. At night, she sits at the table and tries to impersonate Glenn's signature when Peter comes in. She goes to put him for sleep and asks about his activity at talent show. He says that it is a magic trick, but he is worried because Henry is not there to cheer him. He says that he should have died instead and people would have been less sad. She clears his mind that he is of equal importance and cries. Next morning, she does some preparation for the execution of Henry's plan, gets ready and leaves Peter and Christine to school for the show. David also shows up there and she seems unable to comprehend his presence. He says that Peter invited him here to see his magic trick. She says that she has to go for parents volunteer. She watches the first performance, leaves the hall and sets timer according to Henry's plan. She reaches home, takes the gun to the treehouse and sets everything. She lures Glenn to the woods by the mysterious sound. As she gets ready, she hits the ball and it ends up opening the pictures of Henry and Susan. She decides to not shoot him, goes out and finds Glenn outside the door. She tells him that she knows what he has been doing to Christina. He says that he will call his senior and she cannot do anything about it. Glenn calls his senior to discuss the matter, and he replies that they have received a call from school principal, and this matter has to be dealt now. The cops come to his house to arrest him, but he shoots himself. On the other hand, Christina's dance ends and Peter's magic show begins. He says that he will make his brother reappear by magic. He revolves the stick-around box, opens and kicks it when the fake snow starts falling on everyone. The audience breaks into a huge round of applause and Susan comes running to hug Peter. At the end of the show, David says that he never believed in magic, but Peter did it so well. The police siren sounds and Susan goes out. The lady inspector says that Glenn has committed suicide. Christina runs and hugs Susan. Court orders to transfer her custody to Susan immediately, and they got home after happily. Susan joins work, starts painting, burns the red sketchbook and the tape. Henry's narration runs in the background that now it is the story of 3 of them. Susan reads the nighttime story for Peter and Christina, which concludes that flowers never die, but they melt in soil and make the whole garden rich. She tells Christina that her room is almost ready, says goodnight to the kids and closes the door. Subscribe to see more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.